Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Average Jocks Hockey Podcast. This week, we welcome Jim Lang. Jim is a Canadian sportscaster, journalist, and the co-author of Hockey Memoirs with Ty Domi, Max Domi, Wendell Clark, and Brian Berard. He also wrote a few books with Bob McKenzie called Everyday Hockey Heroes.
Jim was also an anchor on Sportsnet, as well as a radio host on the Fan 590, and now he does the morning show on 105.9 The Region in York. So welcome, Jim, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, and thanks to Reggie there for facilitating this.
Hey, I got a lot of extended family in Cornwall, so hey.
Really?
Oh, yeah. My mom was one of 17 kids.
Wow.
So I have a lot of cousins in that. So Reggie said, if you dropped the Reggie name, like, wow, I can't say no.
Well, I appreciate that. Reggie has been awesome he's connected us with a few people, actually. I don't know where he gets his connections, but he's all like, oh, I know that guy. Oh, I know that guy.
All right. How about we begin with the history and how your career in sports journalism began?
Yeah, when I started in radio, I graduated Humber College in the 80s. There was no sports television, no sports radio in Canada. There was no sports radio, and TSN was just starting, and it was a lot of older veteran broadcasters who had about 20, 25 years experience.
Yeah.
And at the time, in the late 80s, if you talk to Rod Smith and a lot of the big on-air names right now, they started in the late 80s behind the scenes, because it would take years back then before you even got in front of a camera to do a little report, let alone anchor anything. It was impossible. So I was in music radio, and then at one time I was at Chom FM Montreal into the mid-90s, and then I got an opportunity to go to the Fan, because obviously sports is my love, but now I had a chance to go work at the Fan 590. This would have been in February of 95. And what happened was there was, at the time, there was a regular beat reporter for the Maple Leafs who traveled with the Leafs. And this is back when radio spent a lot of money in the budget. But he also had a family, had kids. So what would happen is I would produce the morning show, and they'd say, can someone go down to Maple Leaf Gardens to Leaf practice? We need sound. Whether it was training camp or practice, I'm like, well, I'll go. I was single. I could hop on the subway, go down to the old gardens. And back then, this would have been about September of 95, training camp. Pat Burns was still coach. And you had reporters who were there from the 50s who had covered Punch Imlach and Dave Keon. So when you were in the scrum, you didn't say a word. They had the first question. They're like, I'm very serious. And when you saw that the veteran reporters had the questions, they asked their questions, then you would kind of give a nod, and then you would ask your question. And I remember about the third or fourth time I was down there at camp, and I'd asked Pat Burns a question. It was my turn. He goes, that's a good question. And he said that's a good question, and so it's anything like that, sports reporting, it's like repetition. So it's like practicing your shot, practicing pass, practicing anything. You got to do over and over again. So it's like muscle memory. And so what happened was I would produce, but then I would report at the same time. And I didn't care about extra time or extra hours. I just I had always wanted to do this, and I didn't have an avenue to do it until then. So I'll do it. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have kids. I had a dingy little apartment. Bang, let's go. And so and then what's funny is a lot of the books that I write now, the foundation of the relationships were put together, the cornerstones in that fall of 95, covering the first Leafs training camp, remembering the Montreal Canadiens, coming into the Maple Leafs garden for a game day skate, and seeing how everything works back then. The NHL is very different now than it was in the mid-90s, because you basically could, what they would say, the room's open, you could stroll in, very casual. If someone's there, you could have a conversation. I remember God, there were so many players that were just would start talking about stuff. Because I remember Sergio Momesso, and if you know Sergio Momesso, his dad has a place called Momesso's, which is an Italian sandwich shop in the west end of Montreal. Mm-hmm. And you would mention Momesso's to people in the Leafs who had played in Montreal, and they go, "Oh, Momesso's! It's Memestos, it's the best thing ever. And Pat Burns actually would give a cabbie $50 to go get him a Memesto sandwich on a game day skate when he's with the Leafs, when they would go to the old Montreal Forum. Here's $50, go to Memestos, get me a couple of hot pepper sausage sandwiches, bring them back for me, and then you keep the change. You know, I thought that was such a boss move. And Todd Gill, one day I was there, Dan Dunleavy, who's the current radio voice of the Buffalo Sabres and does a phenomenal job. He's taken over for Rick Jeanneret. And we were working together, and Todd Gill, Rockville, Ontario, shout out. He goes, "You guys want some brownies? My wife made brownies." He pulled in a Tupperware, and like that doesn't happen now. You don't have players offering brownies that their wife made, but it was a very different time back then in the mid '90s. And so what happened is over time, like I did a little bit more and a little bit more, and then more reporting and more anchoring and more this, and you just start, you start saying, "Hey, I'll do it," and just keep doing things. And then later on at Sportsnet, what happened is they needed people to write some content for the website. Sportsnet.ca was just launching, and I said, "I'll do it," because my whole thing is I want to try everything, I want to do everything, because I thought it was a skill that could help me, and it's something I could use and maybe use down the road. And a lot of the other talent at the time said, "Well, if I don't get extra money, I'm not going to do it." But I was like, "I don't care, I'm going to do it." And then that was basically how I taught myself how to write into like how I write books now. And so I'm a morning man at a radio station in York Region called 105.9 The Region. And it's like a full service, it's music, but it's sports, it's news, it's community, community, local politics and that. And in the afternoons and evenings and weekends, I do research and write the hockey books. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds. And, and what happens is over time between working on books and going to charity events and just you get to know players, and players when they're playing in the NHL, they have to build a bit of a protective wall about them because there's so much pressure from the coaches, from themselves, from the rest of the league, from the media and the fans. So you get to know them as people when they're done playing. You can see what they're really all about. And it's very, very difficult to not feel that stress as a player. And I think more so than ever, because back in the mid late 90s, early 2000s, there was no social media. Yeah. So if it was not like, if we didn't say this something on Sportsnet, or it was written in by, say, Steve Simmons in the Sun, or Red Fisher of the Montreal Gazette, or the Hot Stove Lounge, or Don Cherry, then that was it. You didn't know what the fans, so now a fan anywhere can go on the social media of a player and absolutely roast them and really say some horrible stuff. And it's tough to block all that out. And I think that's a skill, because it's human nature. Like, well, what did they say about me? Like, I mean, it's hard not to look at that and read that. And because you think, first of all, you're thinking, oh, they must really like me. Then you read it, like, oh my God, why did I read that? And because people, I don't know why, think it's okay to go on social media and say the most horrible things about people, especially hockey players and celebrities. It's almost like, hey, I don't play in the NHL, so I'm going to say horrible things about you because you gave up a bad pass in your own end in a midseason hockey game. So that's their reason for being cruel to another human being. Like,
yeah, thank God nobody comes to my pickup games on weeknights, because I'd get roasted pretty often.
Well, and these same people doing this, like, are you telling me they're absolutely letter perfect at their job every single day? Like, they never make a mistake at work? Like, they've never had, a problem? So does that mean it's okay for someone else to say, like, go on social media, go, Steve's report on Wednesday was awful. Like, what a horrible human being. So that's part of the challenge to me for hockey players and pro athletes, is navigating that. Like, they try to use social media as a platform. Hey, they're involved in a charity. They're doing something. There's a contest. Hey, like, they're going on their social media to say, hey, you can win tickets to see the Montreal Canadiens playing, the Boston Bruins. So they'll just go on social media and say something about a charity or a contest, and someone will use that as an excuse to respond to them and say the most horrible things. And all they're doing is saying, hey, we're doing this giveaway to raise money for the local kids hospital. Here, win tickets to a Montreal Canadiens game or an Ottawa Senators game. And so this is why, sometimes players have built this wall around them, because they're trying to protect themselves. And I totally get it, because that just didn't exist in the mid-late 90s and the early up until like 2009.
So before we start getting into some of our questions, you got to write a couple books with
Yes,
Bob McKenzie.
I did. Yes.
And, you were just talking about, people growing up and what they wanted to do for jobs, and, if everybody critiqued their jobs. I actually wanted to be Bob McKenzie growing up. That was the job I wanted to. I remember sitting at home. My parents would let me stay home on free agent frenzy or trade deadline. I was always allowed to be sick that day from school. And I would always text my buddies and be like, breaking trade, and then try and do word for word whatever Bob was saying. So I was, starstruck and disappointed once, knowing that, starstruck that you have written a couple books with him, but very disappointed he retired or took semi-retirement a couple of years ago. I've tried a few of his beverages, his Bobby Margaritas line since his retirement. Yeah. But I really miss seeing him. Do you still stay in contact with him?
I do. He actually just sent me a note the other day, oddly enough. And he, first of all, Bob McKenzie he's a real person. He's an absolutely wonderful guy. Just a good dude, good family guy, great to work with. But the reason he's Bob McKenzie, and I've witnessed it firsthand, is how hard he works. So he's got 2 iPhones, one for his family and one is strictly work. And it's every coach and scout and GM and player and insider that you can think of, and he's working it and working it. And even though Bob says he is semi-retired, I know Bob well enough that when it comes to the World Juniors and trade deadline and draft day and free agent frenzy, he didn't just show up and put a suit on and be Bob McKenzie. Bob, it puts the work in. And that's the biggest thing I learned from him is as hard as you think you're working, you're not working as hard as Bob McKenzie.
Well, and that is a good motto for me to have as one of my heroes. It's kind of weird because everybody's like, I'm going to be in the NHL someday as a kid. And I'm like, I'm not going to make it. I want to be that guy. I want to be Bob friggin' McKenzie.
Well, I mean, look at you could pick a lot worse people than Bob McKenzie. And I just think Bob, the person, is first class. And I consider it a career highlight that I was able to write 2 books with him and get to spend time with him and stuff like that, because just personally and getting to know him and but professionally learning from him. And sometimes we'd have conversations and they're very short and sweet and to the point because he's a busy guy. Mm-hmm. He would just say blah, blah, blah. And he would just send me on my way, let me do my thing. And then because he always had so many things he was juggling, even in quote unquote semi-retirement, he's still quite busy. So Bob is, I mean, he set the standard for the insider. He is, I don't even know of a comparable. I know they have some insiders in baseball, and there's Adam Schefter in the NFL, but and there's a few in basketball. But to me, when it comes to insider in hockey, Bob's been at the top of his game. Sorry, it's my dog wanting me to play with him. Bob's been at the top of his game since the late 80s. Now you think about that. He's been on TSN as an insider at the top of his game for over 30 years, about 35 years. That's tough to beat. And he every time something would come along or a trend or whatever, Bob was always working to give the best information possible. And he has an absolute gift of giving you the information without sort of revealing sources. Or it's one thing to gather all the information to the volume that Bob does, but his gift is to give you the information to the viewer that you have some knowledge, like I didn't know that, without burning sources, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So he's protected the integrity of who he is and the trust of who he is, and that's why he gets the information that he does.
Yeah, and I think that speaks volumes, because there's so many guys now that consider themselves insiders, and they'll break news or they'll send out a tweet or whatever, and you kind of but I feel like Bob and probably now Elliot Friedman or Kevin Weeks, whenever they say something, it's like, take it to the bank, this is happening, done deal.
Absolutely. And Elliot is, I used to work with Elliot. He's very talented and works very hard as well. You just don't get that kind of position they wouldn't trust you because, as I mentioned earlier about the league, if players and coaches and GMs in the league thinking you're just saying stuff because you're doing it to expose people for your own good, you're not going to have a lot of information, and all your sources will be gone, and you won't get information because you're still dealing with human beings and people with jobs and careers and families. So that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it in hockey and in life. There's certain things you may see or experience no one needs to know that. Just because I saw it or heard it or someone told me, no one else needs to know that. They just need to know like this and this about like an injury or a trade, or maybe a guy was sent down. That's what fans want to know. Hey, a scout said this. They went to a junior game and got blah 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 blah. Looks like there's going to be a big trade. But as far as the personal stuff, unless it intrudes in hockey, unless something happens and it affects, something happens personally, and then all of a sudden the player can't play, then it becomes a story. Other than that, like, we don't need to know that because that's their business.
So I guess we'll jump into our questions now. I feel like I could just listen to you all day. Like, you just have so much, and I'm just trying to take it all in because, I mean, you're kind of in a position where I wanted to be in what I would eventually like to do. So it's just like, yes, keep talking.
Ask me anything. I'm here, guys. Hey, Cornwall, shout out.
So let's jump right into some of our questions. We're going to start with, we'll start with the Habs and we'll work our way around. We have a lot of goaltending questions. So we'll start in Montreal. Jake Allen. I mean, it looks like they just re-signed him. He's going to be their guy for the next few years. Yeah. For those of you that are listening on Apple TV Apple Podcast or Spotify, that was a thumbs down from Jim. Samuel Montembeault, signed an extension as well. And they were saying the other day, I forget, I think it was Bally Sports I was watching them play on. So it was the American feed, but they're all Samuel Montembeault could have been a star in Florida if they didn't sign Bobrovsky. And I was kind of I don't know about that one. And then they drafted Spencer Knight, so that he was the odd man out, but, he could really become something in Montreal. But then they re-signed Jake Allen, so clearly they're not that confident in Samuel Montembeault. Jake Allen hasn't even come close to the numbers he's had in Montreal, given he's only had 2 seasons as a starter, that he did as a starter in St. Louis. I just don't know. I feel like Montreal has so much hope at every other position. They seem to have such deep defense in prospects and in players they have right now. And then same thing, they have a wealth of young offense coming up. But then it seems to kind of dry up in nets. And even Caden Primo, hasn't really panned out yet. Looks great in the AHL. As soon as he comes up, it's floodgates are open.
Well, there's 2 things in play here. One, Jake Allen doesn't have Alex Pietrangelo playing 25 lockdown minutes in front of him every night.
It's fair.
And
yeah.
Pietrangelo's a point-a-game defenseman this year with Vegas, and he's playing 25 lockdown minutes every night. Mm-hmm. You throw him out there, you're guaranteed 25 stellar minutes from your lead defenseman. Jake Allen doesn't have that in Montreal. And how can you look at goaltending in Montreal and not think Carey Price? Carey Price set an exceptional standard. Mm-hmm. He willed that team to the Cup final, willed them in 2020 when they had no right being there before they lost to Tampa. That was Carey Price. So if you're a Montreal Canadiens fan or you're the media and you're looking at Jake Allen, you're like, nah, he's okay. He's not Carey Price. Right? I mean,
my thoughts exactly.
They had Ken Dryden, all-timer, Patrick Waugh, all-timer, and then they had Carey Price, one of the best goalies of his generation.
That picture right there.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jake Allen is a serviceable, professional goaltender. But is he a guy that when the chips are on the line and you need to win a game, do you trust him? And you can't tell me that anyone in Habs management really trust him to put him out there like a Vasilevsky or some of these other elite goalies where like that I'm going to throw them out there and he's probably going to hold them to one goal. We get 2 goals, we're winning the game because once he lets one, he's not letting in 2. And so Jake Allen, based on his goals against and save percentage, he's just okay. His save percentage is under 9. That's not cutting it in the NHL. And unfortunately, he's always going to be measured by the Carey Price measuring stick. So, he's a placeholder. Let's be honest. The Montreal Canadiens are a work in progress. Cole Caulfield is an unbelievable talent. And I just think he's going to be so good. I love Suzuki. And, you look at some of the pieces you mentioned, like, man, Montreal, man, there's so much to love about them. But I don't think Jake Allen's going to be one when they get to the playoffs is going to run the table and bring him back to the Cup final. It's probably going to be another goalie.
Yeah, and you know what? It makes me nervous just because, like, we have so much talent that's coming up. And, they always say goaltender's the position that takes the longest to develop. And it's like the fact that we don't really have a clear-cut, I guess, idea of what's coming up. And it's like it'll likely be, a free agent acquisition or something in a trade. I don't know. Like, I feel like until that is solved, I have doubts on the direction the team is going.
The Toronto Maple Leafs have doubts with Matt Murray. Like, what Matt Murray are they getting? The Matt Murray with the Pittsburgh or the Matt Murray that was, barely adequate? There are so many teams in the league with goaltending issues. If I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan, I'm not too concerned because this is not their year. They're not going on a deep playoff run this year. So let's see what a trade deadline or offseason or free agency has in store, and maybe they get their goalie, because if they get that goalie to complement what they have, as you mentioned, currently and coming up in the system, they're like, wow, Montreal Canadiens, You had that goaltending with the young talent. You got something special there. I think the goaltending is a bigger concern for other teams around the league who are a playoff team, but with their current goaltending situation, you're not confident they're going to go very far. Where Montreal, I get why they signed Jake Allen, because Jake Allen's a placeholder until they get to the point where they need to get a big gun in there to go far.
And I think what you said about Jake Allen in St. Louis playing behind a Pietrangelo, that was a point per game defenseman, and playing 25 shutdown minutes a game, I think speaks to exactly the situation Matt Murray was in Pittsburgh. And I feel like, why didn't it pan out in Ottawa? I love Thomas Chabot. Thomas Chabot is not a Chris Letang. I love Morgan Rielly. I think he's maybe half a step behind a Chris Letang.
And now he's hurt.
And now he's out a few weeks. Matt Murray is probably a decent shot in practice away from being on the IR again. I just feel like, Matt Murray had the big hype, signed the contract based on the team that was playing in front of him in Pittsburgh, not necessarily, him being an all-star goaltender. And I think you see the same thing with Jari and DeSmith. Each night, that team has a chance to win whenever you have Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Ricard Raquel, Chris Letang, Jason Zucker. Like, there's so many talented players on that team. How they stay under the cap, I have no idea. But it just, to me, it's a product of what Pittsburgh, is doing in that organization, more so than it is anything in nets, which I guess kind of contradicts what I was saying about the Habs, where I guess you can get away sometimes with a decent goaltender if you build a strong team in front of you.
Right. Well, if you have Crosby, Malkin, and Letang as your top 3, sure, you can just get by with an okay goaltender at not top tier, but second tier goaltender. Not many teams have Malkin, Crosby, and Letang. So that's why they require exceptional goaltending. But even if you look at the last few years of teams when they win the Cup final, they get exceptional goaltending, because 4 rounds, 7-game series, the physical, emotional, mental abuse they go through, they even get to the Cup final, then win there. there are some nights your goalie has to win it for you because you just have nothing in the tank, and you're fighting for every goal. And so, like, how many times do you see deep in the postseason there's a 1-0 playoff game? It happens all the time, because that every inch of ice is contested, and sometimes your goalie's better than the other goalie, and that's the reason why you win.
So let's move to another team's goaltending now. We'll stay in the East, and we'll look at Detroit, where last year they went and picked up Alex Nedeljkovic from Carolina, thinking, okay, young guy, he's going to be their number one. And then this offseason, they went and got Ville Husso, who has now taken over that number one from Nedeljkovic. I really like him. I thought St. Louis screwed up big time in getting rid of this guy. Just with, I feel like there's always two tales of Jordan Binnington each season, where he does very well and he's lights out, and then in the other half of the season, it's like, who the hell's this guy? Let's send him down. I feel like Ville Husso's a little more consistent. But so far this year, their numbers are pretty well identical, as well as the team records. So if you were, Doug Armstrong in St. Louis, would you have kept Ville Husso over Binnington?
I'm not sure it was Doug's decision. I think Craig Berube had a lot to do with it. I think there's a trust factor because Craig won a Stanley Cup with Jordan Binnington as his goalie. And I mean, I don't think you can underplay that the fact that Binnington was his guy when they rode him all the way and won the Stanley Cup. And it was only just a couple of years ago. So if they have to make a decision, I'm sure Craig Berube, because of what he's done, he's not kept out of this conversation with Armstrong, and they have a joint discussion. Look, this is keep Binnington. I know what I get in them, and we want a cup with them. And unfortunately, teams can't keep everyone. But it's just because of the cap, it's not possible. And so, I mean, right now you think, well, why did they keep Binnington? Well, because Berube knows what he's got in Binnington. He won a cup with him before a couple of years ago. And right now his numbers are okay. You mentioned he's on a really solid run right now with both goals against and save percentage. St. Louis is playing well. Now, will Binnington have a cold streak? History says that, at sometime this season he's going to hit a wall, and they'll probably have to give him a break for a bit. But what Berube and the Blues are hoping that come late April when the playoffs start, he's back to playing like he is right now and on a hot streak because they've done it before together.
And like you were saying about kind of casualties of the cap, the Vegas Golden Knights, they got Marc-Andre Fleury, played really well, shipped him out. Robin Lehner's their guy, did really well, gets hurt out the entire season. Logan Thompson comes in, just absolutely lights out. It's almost like they just have like a cat with 9 lives where, okay, we got rid of this goalie. And this guy steps up and now he's just phenomenal. Do you think with the age and how well Logan Thompson's playing that it's pretty much like it's his crease now? If Robin Lehner were to come back, it is Logan Thompson's crease to lose. And does that make Robin Lehner expandable? Like, I believe he just signed an extension with Vegas, but I mean, he's not going to want to be a backup. I don't think he's going to want to split time. Do they look at a trade?
That's a great question. I mean, I kind of think Bruce Cassidy is just going to stick with the hot goalie. Like, he'd be crazy not to. If your goalie's playing that well and you're winning, Pietrangelo is having a Norris Trophy type season in front of him. Jack Eichel's reborn in Vegas. With the team's rolling so well and you're winning that much, I mean, eventually you have to give Logan Thompson a rest now and then. So you throw Lehner in there when he's healthy. But for the most part, it'd be Thompson's starting job to lose. And if he's playing that well consistently, if they're winning consistently, especially out west where wins are so hard to come by, especially you're playing in the same conference as the Avalanche and teams like that. Yeah, Vegas would be crazy not to. I mean, it's fair or not, people talk about you can't lose your job to injury. That's not true. And we've seen examples of that in all sports. If the person that comes in for you is playing well and winning, the pressure to win, both from coach, GM, and organization, and the more you win, the more money you make, you're not going to mess with that because of some sense of loyalty because he had the job before. But, I mean, if Thompson all of a sudden hits a wall and Leonard's healthy, Leonard goes in and starts winning, well, then it'd be Leonard's job again. But for right now, why would you ever mess with Logan Thompson? His numbers are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And Vegas are playing lights out. And Eichel and Pietrangelo are just having great years. So for Bruce Cassidy's like, why mess with a good thing? Everything's just keep it rolling out there. Keep it going.
And I mean, they're faced with a problem that I feel most teams would love to have, where it's just like, no matter who they throw in net, seems to put up solid numbers. Like, I think Justin has some of Logan Thompson's numbers here, and I was amazed when he read them to me. Like, I knew he was doing well. He was doing well, but I didn't realize he was doing this well.
Yeah. Go ahead. What are the numbers? I just don't remember off the top of my head.
So this season alone, he's 10-3. His goals against average is 2.4. Save percentage is 920.
See, that's it. His save percentage is 920.
But you had mentioned earlier about Jake Allen and Pietrangelo. Do you think Thompson's a bit of a product of that?
Oh, absolutely. But Pietrangelo's having maybe his best year ever. And he's got, I think I've always thought Bruce Cassidy was a good coach. And I mean, the team in front of him is really good. It's a perfect scenario for Thompson. He's getting the reps. He's getting the confidence. He obviously probably has confidence. I don't think, how could it be higher than it is right now with the numbers he's putting up, and he's winning seemingly every time he goes in there, and the team in front of him is so good. And then when the team in front of you is that good and you let a goal in, it's not the end of the world, because you know what? They're probably going to get a couple more goals and I'm fine. I mean, human nature is, if your team in front of you is shaky and you're doing everything to stop every puck because you want to keep your team in the game, and you give up a goal, and you're like, oh God, I don't know if we're going to win now because I just let in a goal. But I don't think that's an issue in Vegas. They don't have trouble scoring goal, creating offense.
Justin, do you want to talk a bit about the Zegras offside goal from a few weeks ago? This is not my forte. I feel like even the other night there was a replay in the Montreal game, and they were challenging for offside. I'm like, what the hell? Like,
it was like millimeters is what they came down to, and it was like 30 seconds before the goal actually happened, so it didn't really affect the goal, but they still called it back on millimeters, and lots of review. What do you think?
I think what you said about the 30 seconds is bang on. It's so, I'm glad you said that. It's millimeters, and it's 30 seconds before the play. So if it happens and he takes a shot and scores right away, that's different. But the play went on 30 seconds. An NHL shift is 45 seconds. So basically a whole shift went by, and then Zegras put that phenomenal highlight reel goal that's on everyone's video, but then gets waved off. And now the NHL's not doing itself any favors. You know, the NHL is still fighting, especially in America, the NFL and the NBA, to get out there and make stars. Here's a kid that should be a star, a young, phenomenal athlete with magic hands scoring a goal like that. But it kind of kills the highlight if you're watching ESPN or Fox Sports in the States and going, yeah, the goal's waved off because he was offside by about that much 30 seconds earlier. Now, if you're a casual sports fan, like, what?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're offside, take a shot, score, and like, whoa, no, you were offside. And you're the guy who took the shot, like, oh, I was offside. But when the play goes on 30 seconds, I think that kind of wipes out your, like, there has to be a time like, okay, you can't review that because the play went on 30 seconds. You're telling me your team couldn't clear the puck at your own end in 30 seconds when a shift is 45 in the NHL?
Yeah.
Like, that's a whole shift.
And it was
yeah, I agree.
Like, it was millimeters. It's not like it was a blatant offside. It was so close. So close.
Yeah, that's where the NHL sometimes gets their own way. Sometimes that's not smart.
No, and kind of like what you said about, it being a highlight reel goal, like, like you said, it kind of makes it a joke where it's like, yeah, look how great this was, but it didn't count. It's like if somebody scored a highlight goal in practice, and it's like,
social media is blowing up, and like it's like a top trending thing. Zegras goal, and then you see in the little caption, Zegras scores a Michigan goal waved off offside. You're like, oh, that's disappointing.
Yeah.
But I mean, the video of it is phenomenal. You're like, oh my God, his puck control and like the NHL needs more of that, not less of it.
Yeah, he reminds me of almost like a modern day Pavel Datsyuk.
Yeah.
Oh.
Speaking of another controversial NHL decision, serial offender Alex Edler gives like a knee-on-knee hit with Connor McDavid. No suspension after what seemed to be 2 full weeks of suspensions being thrown out left, right, and center against, and I'm not saying that a suspension is more warranted if it's against a superstar, but some of the guys getting hit that were getting suspended, you're 2 games for that, it was kind of like, all right. But then, no suspension, and could have been, like, you've seen some knee-on-knee injuries that are, they're almost career-ending, or, players out for 6-8 months after. He just took out the NHL's poster boy, and there's nothing. Like, not even like, here's a $5,000 fine. Nothing.
And it wouldn't have been his first knee-on-knee. He had the one on Hyman a couple years ago.
He had the one on Hyman a couple years ago. He's been suspended, I think, for a hit to the head on Thomas Hurdle. Yeah. Let alone, like, those are just in recent years. I'm sure if we went back, there's probably a couple more fines. Like, I just don't get it, and I think it comes back to the NHL's, Board of Safety or whatever's history of being so inconsistent. No matter who's in, I think it's George Peros now. When it was Colin Campbell, it was inconsistent. I just don't know what the fix is here. And, they got on track doing these videos. They started a few years back of, this is why this isn't a suspension, or this is why this is a suspension, or he got fined for this reason. But nothing came out. It's almost been, super quiet about this whole situation. I'm kind of like, okay.
Well, here's my issue is that about 10 years ago, the NFL decided they're going to protect quarterbacks at all costs because the quarterbacks drive the league. They're the stars of the league. So you can't hit a quarterback in the NFL from the knees down or the shoulders up. That's a 15-yard penalty automatically. And the amount of quarterbacks getting injured went down. And people want to see Patrick Mahomes go up against Tom Brady. They want to see the star quarterbacks do their thing. Connor McDavid, as you mentioned, is the face of the NHL. So what happens if you're an NHL player and someone does that to Connor McDavid? Now, Edler's if he's not getting fined or suspended, why would he ever stop? Because that's what he's being paid to do. That's not his problem. That's the league's issue. So now the next time the Oilers play the Canucks, what do you think the Oilers are going to do?
Yeah.
They're going to want to get after Edler for what he did to McDavid. So now the league has more of a problem because they didn't deal with it right away.
I mean, that worked out well for them in the past. Just ask Steve Moore.
Right. I mean, this is where, you mentioned the player safety committee, and I honestly don't know what the answer is because they've had a lot of different people, but I know a lot of different sports leagues have basically said, if you do this, this is the penalty no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
There's no gray area. If I hit a quarterback in the head, it's a 15-yard penalty no matter what. If I do this, it's a technical foul on NBA. So if you should say, whether you meant it or not, if it's knee on knee, it's a match penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're saying knee on knee, match penalty, then people would think twice about knee on knees, right?
Yeah,
because there's no interpretation for the referee because it says knee on knee, match penalty, or 10-minute misconduct, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Automatically you get a 10-minute misconduct. Now, if he's got a 10-minute misconduct, knee on knee, then it brings everything down because he's got a 10-minute misconduct.
Yeah.
And then so the Oilers aren't looking for revenge, and people felt like it got dealt with.
Right.
Instead of this lingering, is it dirty? Is it not dirty? Well, the NHL player is going to push everything to the envelope in order to find a way to win every single night. That's part of the reason what they're getting paid to do. Plus, they're all hyper competitive. It's not up to them to enforce the rules. It's up to the officials, the head of the officials in the league. That's Bettman, Daly, all the heads of the different supervisors in the NHL referees and the referees themselves. And so whether it's regular season or postseason, when they have the next CBA, they say, look, if you do this and I hit you like that, that's an automatic 10-minute misconduct. No matter if it's game 6 of the Stanley Cup final or it's game 40 of the regular season, then let's just see how it changes. Because I mean, that's part of the problem, I think, for a lot of NHL fans is the loose interpretation of the rule book, depending on the official, depending on what game it is, depending on what playoff game it is, it drives a lot of hockey fans crazy because hockey fans watch other sports, and in other sports, whether it's the Super Bowl or Game 3 of the regular season, a blow to the head of the quarterback is still a 15-yard penalty.
Yeah.
Because
and I
that's
think
what the
even,
rule says.
you mentioned the different stuff, depending on the game, depending on the official, depending on, even the time in the game. But, like, I've never seen a player get more fines and leeway than Brad Marchand. Like, and again, I'm just, pointing him out, and I'm sure there's others, but, butt end of the stick. Okay, Marchand, 2,500. Yeah, that's really hurting his pocketbook. I'm sure he's really going to think twice about that 2,500. But, if it was Aaron Asham or Donald Brashear, Ryan Reeves doing it, are we having the same conversation at $2,500?
No, because that's part of the problem with the NHL sometimes when they hand out discipline and punishment is they go, he's a fifth, sixth defenseman, he's a fourth line player, so that means he must get punished more than a star player. Mm-hmm. Whether you like Brad Marchand or not, he's a star player for the Bruins.
Yes.
I mean, no matter what you think of his tactics, his offensive production and his star ability is not, to me, in question at all. I mean, he's a phenomenal hockey player. Mm-hmm. But if he's doing things and not really getting punished, why would Brad stop?
Yeah.
Because he gets under people's skin and gives them an advantage and helps the Bruins win. Why would he ever stop that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because he's being paid to score goals and help the Bruins win games. That's his job.
Speaking of star players and different, fuck me. I'm so like, I lost my train of thought.
Did you want to talk about Ryan Reynolds in the Sens?
Yeah,
I'd love to.
I would love to talk about Ryan Reynolds in the Sens. So I guess, as I mentioned, I don't know if you've seen our episode. Was it last week with Noodles? We talked a little bit about this.
I think so.
Or you know what? No, it was in our lightning round. It was just you and I, but it was the Noodles episode. I talked about it would be stupid for anybody putting in a bid not to try and include him just because of the attraction or the draw that he's going to have, and that he's going to be more of a nice cherry on top more than he is going to be the deep pocket in this deal. And I'm surprised already that two guys, I believe it's the owner of the Hamilton Bulldogs,
Michael Andlauer.
Yes, and I forget the other owner in the OHL have kind of teamed up to make a joint bid, and they both previously have tried to purchase the Senators from Eugene in the past. Mm-hmm. That they wouldn't try and get Ryan in, kind of first deal, kind of scare people off, from putting in a competing bid.
Like Gary Bettman is the commissioner, has a little bit of say because last time I checked, say I'm going to buy a team, it has to be voted on. Mm-hmm. And you have to go through a different vetting process before you say, hey, okay, you can buy this team. Mm-hmm. You got to make sure you're, are you okay, your financials and all that. If Gary does anything, no matter who ends up buying the Senators, he's got to move heaven and earth to make sure Ryan Reynolds is part of it. He's an A-list actor. He's funny. He's likable. Mm-hmm. He's Canadian.
Yeah.
He's at the top of his game. He can make any movie he wants. He can put NHL players in movies. The big problem with the NHL is outside of diehard, hardcore hockey fans, a lot of the best players in your team could walk through a bar or a restaurant or a mall all over North America and they wouldn't know who he is. Mm-hmm. Right? And the NBA does a phenomenal job of making their stars stars. Same with the NFL, and the NHL desperately needs a Ryan Reynolds and his marketing ability. Look how he sells his, I think it's called Aviation Gin, and the videos he makes on social media. They're better than a lot of the TV shows I watch on Netflix. So you want a guy like that involved in the NHL with the Sens, doing chirpy videos about I hate the Leafs and Sens Canadians. I mean, people would eat that up.
Yeah.
especially for their American TV partners like ESPN and that. I mean, it makes too much sense. I mean, if Gary does anything, whoever comes up with the money, say, got it. But I don't care if he puts in $1. Make sure Ryan Reynolds has a role with this team as a quote unquote part owner, because I mean, a lot of these rich people, individuals, I mean, they're not there for their marketing and sales ability, right? Because that's not how they got to be billionaires. But Ryan does it every day for a living.
Yeah.
That's who he is. So why not use him to the NHL's benefit? So to me, I mean, I don't care who comes up with the money, but Ryan Reynolds has got to be part of it. He has to be.
We'll stick with the Sens. I'm not a Sens fan, and I feel like I might get some flack from Sens fans for this. And this is another topic Justin and I touched after Noodles left last week. Chris Neil getting his jersey retired. I understand why they're doing it, but I feel like they're kind of grasping at straws of, we're trying to you'll go to a Canadian Tire Center, you're going to see banners in the rafters, competed in the 2021-2022 season. You're going to see, they're doing this, what was it, Ring of Honor or something like that, and they're inducting Wade Redden. I don't know, like I just feel like they're trying to force something. They're trying to force this legacy thing. And like 100% players that should have their jerseys retired, Daniel Alfredson, probably Chris Phillips. Much past that, probably nobody else. In my mind, as an Ottawa Senator, maybe some earlier guys, maybe from that, like, and again, even at that, different kind of franchise, right? They were in, left, came back. If you're talking just the came back guys, Alfredson, Phillips. If you're talking the before they left the NHL, maybe there's a couple guys in there you want to retire just as a...
No, but Chris Neil started his career as a Sen, played over 1,000 games, ended his career as a Sen. Right?
But does everybody that plays 1,000 games deserve to have their jersey retired?
Chris was not just a guy who played 1,000 games. I think he kind of represented what the Sens were all about. And I have no problem with if the Sens is a franchise retiring his number. Now, maybe in a different team with a different organization, maybe if this was like the Red Wings of the 90s, early 2000s, they wouldn't have done it. But I totally get why the Sens retired his number. I have no problem with it. He was a well-respected, tough, hard-nosed player. And memory serves, he was never suspended for as tough as he was and hard-nosed player as he was. I don't think Chris Neil was ever suspended in his NHL career. I mean, people can check on that and correct me if I'm wrong, and I remember I wrote a book with Max Dolmy, and Max was at a face-off in his rookie year, and he's told me that he was playing against the Sens, and he went up to Chris Neil and said, "Hey, congratulations in game number 1,000. My dad used to love playing against you." And he goes, "Oh, thanks, kid." He goes, "Oh, your dad was really tough." Like obviously talking about Ty. So I think there was a mutual respect amongst a lot of people, players in the NHL, because I don't know about you. To me, it's still a big deal to play 1,000 games in the NHL, especially with the same franchise.
1,000 games, of course, is a huge milestone. I just think it's just so off of what we're used to, or the type of caliber player that you see get their jersey retired and have that honor bestowed. And I'm not trying to take away anything that Chris Neil did in his career. But to me, you mentioned Ty Domi. They're probably in the same category of what they brought to the table to a team. Do I think that the Leafs or the Rangers should retire Ty Domi's jersey? No. If we compare it to somebody in this era that I think is maybe brings similar features to a team that Chris Neil did, as maybe Brendan Gallagher. Do I think Brendan Gallagher should have his jersey retired as much as the fans love him and, the heart and the soul that he brings this organization? No. And I guess that's just kind of where I'm at, where it's just like...
I hear what you're saying, but a lot of franchises don't always retire a jersey based on numbers and accomplishments. There's also other factors in play. And I think for the Senators, I think the reason Chris Neil's jersey got retired is not so much the numbers, but the player he was, the person he was, what he meant to the franchise. and his longevity and stuff like that. So, I mean, hey, if you didn't like it, that's fine. I have no problem with it. If they want to do it, no problem at all. He was always nice to me to deal with, and he always had like, a couple teeth missing and all that. And he looked like a hockey player. And, you see him up close and like, boy, he earned a tough living for a long time. Like, like the scars up here and all that. And you don't really see it on TV until you're up close in a scrum and interviewing him and talking to him. You're like, this guy's been stitched up a few times. He left parts of his body around rinks around the NHL for that team. And I think that's part of the things that maybe fans don't see that the Sens franchise saw, and that's one of the reasons they did it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like I said, I don't have anything against him, and it's not that I dislike him. I just think it's so in left field whenever I heard that, especially some of the jersey retirements that are coming up this year. Just to see Chris Neil.
It's not quite Marian Hossa in Chicago, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess that's where I was getting at, where it's just, they never really won a cup. Yeah, he leads, probably their franchise in hits and penalty minutes and fights and whatever. But I guess it's just like there's been so many of those guys that we've seen, especially in that era, that it's like I would have never... If you would have told me, Kate, name, the next 5 retired Sens jerseys, I don't think Chris Neil would have made my 5. Like,
I honestly, I don't know what goes into it, but often these franchises like to commemorate certain players, do tributes, do video tributes, and that. I really don't. It's whatever. If that's what they want to do, that I'm okay with it. Just drop the puck and let's play. Let's go.
Now, you think outside the original 6 and those big market teams, do you think jersey retirements are going to change a little bit for those like smaller market teams on who they choose going from this?
Well, I think it's all based on like Stanley Cups. I think Tampa, which is a non-traditional market, Steven Stamkos eventually will have his jersey retired because of his numbers and because the back-to-back Stanley Cup championships. So you look at some of the different teams that have won cups and who are their star players. Like LA, eventually Anze Kopitar, probably for what he did with the Kings and the run they had. Mm-hmm. So you start thinking about players and what they meant to the franchise, and did they bring them glory, and what they meant. So I mean, look at, we talk about the original 6. A lot of these other franchises have been around a long time, from the late 60s, like the Flyers and the Blues and the Islanders. And you look at what the Islanders did when they came in the league in 72, and 8 years later they were a dynasty, right? I mean, no one could beat them. And that was in 8 years they did that. And so, the concept of original 6, I understand the romanticism about it. But if there was a special player who did special things, like Pavel Bure in Vancouver, never won a cup. But when Pavel Bure was in his peak before his knee injuries in Vancouver, I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, you're like, what am I watching here? And I look at a Timo Silani in Anaheim. That's the kind of guy that they would retire his jersey because of who he was, and eventually winning a cup and stuff like that. But you know what I mean? Like, so every franchise is going to have different connections to different players for different reasons, and that's why they probably go into maybe eventually retiring jerseys and stuff like that.
All right, move on. We'll talk about the Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we touched the Leafs goaltending depth earlier. But, I mean, talking about the kind of their D options now. Like, and I mean, you're probably a Leafs fan, I'm assuming, being up that way for so long. TJ Brody out, Morgan Riley out. Muzzin out. You have former Montreal Canadian All-Star Jordy Ben.
They're going to say Victor Mete.
Well, him too. I mean, you guys have a nice, maybe put them together, have a Montreal's former 7th and 8th pairing, eighth defenseman.
That 35-year-old Jordy Ben's logging 18 minutes a night of ice time for the Leafs. They need him right now.
That's scary.
Giordano. Well, yeah, because unfortunately, because the Leafs are so cap heavy up front with their top 4 paid forwards, they have very limited cap room. And so the last thing they could afford is to have Morgan Riley go out to injury. And so he's out a minimum 10 games because he's on long-term injured reserve. So that's a kick in the teeth for Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas. And I mean, I think right now they have approximately just over $7 million in cap space if you factor in the long-term injured reserve, the cap relief from there. So they have limited options, and I almost feel like they're going to try to make do what they can, and hopefully at the deadline they'll have enough money left over to get someone. But they're definitely going to need to get defensive help at the deadline. There's no question.
So who do you see? Like, who's next man up there? I mean, you have Giordano, Ben, Mete, Liljegren, Sandin. Like who's coming in? Like, who's the next guy up?
Well, unfortunately, Hall is still getting a lot of time.
Yeah, that's how good he is. I forgot about him.
There's just have limited options. Basically, they're going to throw guys out there. That's why a guy like Jordy Ben and Mark Giordano is veteran and like they're older athletes, but they're invaluable to Sheldon Keefe right now.
Do you think the Leafs can look at maybe reacquiring like Nikita Zaitsev, or maybe looked at Vancouver at like Tyler Myers?
Luke Schen's name has been thrown
Luke
around.
Schenn, that'd be a blast
because
from the past.
He comes up, I think he's like $900,000. It's
Yeah.
under $1 million. So with their cap issues, if you can get Luke Schenn at $900,000 prorated,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you do it? Because I mean, he's an NHL defenseman, right? And, it's not like he's unfamiliar with the market. But unfortunately, Kyle Dubas, he's got limited options. Because his top 4 forwards make so much money and eat up so much of the cap, this is what happens. There's very little margin for error in the back end.
Well,
and so, some of these older defensemen that they got for peanuts, in the big picture financially, they probably look down the bench and go, thank goodness they're there, because what would they do? I mean, and so that's part of the problem with the Leafs. They've basically put all their chips on the table based on Marner and Matthews and Nylander and John Tavares, the big 4.
Yeah.
And so if they're playing lights out every night, they're probably going to win. But defensively, it's just, they're trying to hold on until some of these guys get healthy. Now, the problem with Jake Muzzin, it's a cervical spinal injury, which they can't even think about him till February at the earliest. Don't forget, Morgan Riley hurt his knee in junior before he got drafted. So there's probably concern maybe re-injuring an old injury from his junior days. And so 10 games, here we are at the end of November almost. You're probably looking at close to the Christmas break at that point. Why even waste? So you're probably not going to see him until January, to be honest, right? And then TJ Brody would be the guy they have to hope gets healthy and gets back in the lineup. He would be probably the earliest to return. But as far as making deals and stuff, I mean, there's a possibility Kyle Dubas will do something, but I mean, he's going to be in cap hell next summer. And they'd have to pray the cap goes up a fair chunk. Now, Gary Bettman did say that they foresee the cap to go up, but whatever number the cap goes up next year, the Dubas and the Maple Leafs and their capologists and their front office have to keep their fingers crossed that it's 2 or 3 million or whatever extra. Like, it has to go up. It can't stay the same. It has to go up for them to fit a lot of these players into the cap, or they're going to be forced into a situation. They're going to have to trade someone to give themselves the cap room they need to build around the rest of the team. Because in Toronto, whatever happens in the regular season, unless they win a first round in the playoffs, it's going to be considered a disaster.
I think Kyle Dubas is gone if they don't.
I agree.
If they don't win,
and if Dubas is gone, Sheldon Keefe's gone.
Yeah.
That's the only reason Keefe is there. So then Brendan Shanahan's starting over with coach and GM because they can't win a first round. And that, I mean, until they win a first round, that black cloud hanging over them about their job future will not leave. It will not.
You know what? I mean, I don't know if you want to consider this a hostile prediction, but I think that Dubas gets fired in the offseason, as does Sheldon Keefe, and I think they right their wrong that they did to Mark Hunter prior to giving the job to Dubas. I think Mark Hunter comes in as the next GM.
There's a lot of people around the Leafs Nation that would think that's a great idea, because Mark Hunter's the reason that Mitch Marner's a Maple Leaf.
Yeah.
He's the one that fought for him, and Mark Hunter. I think there are some people that wouldn't mind that at all.
I think that would be a smart move for them. Not to say that being cap smart or analytically smart like Dubas isn't a good thing. But we see how well that worked for John Chica in Arizona.
But look, Steve Eisman pays a guy to crunch numbers.
Yeah.
That's your assistant GM basically runs your cap. That's what.
Yeah.
But let's face it. I mean, you have to have someone on the payroll that all they do is go through the CBA and crunch numbers.
100%. Look at Moneyball.
That's exactly it. And that's what it is now. In the NHL is the same thing as what Billy Beane did with Moneyball. You have to have a Billy Beane type guy in your, well, it would have been Jonah Hill was the guy in your front office doing that every day, looking at the ramifications, trade this, send this guy down, long-term injured reserve. How much money do we have? Every team in the league's got a big whiteboard, and it's basically players, dollar signs, cap implications. Like you see, they have the websites you can just go up, and they have the same thing. Who comes off? Like what room do they have? And it's constantly evolving. And that's part of the problem is a lot of fans go, why don't they trade for this guy? Well, if they don't have the room, they can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because the rules won't allow it. And then if you do it and you have no room, then all of a sudden you're playing one or two players short at the end of the season because you're over the cap. So that's part of the problem of being a GM in the NHL is not just, I like this player, let's make a deal for him. There's so many other things that go into it. I mean, that's the capologist and working the cap is part of the genius of a GM. So if you look at what Yzerman did in Tampa before he went to Detroit, he signed his core players, Hedman, Stamkos, Vasilevsky, Kucherov, to all really reasonable deals. Mm-hmm. They're making good money. It's tax-free in Florida, but if you look at it, they're making less than some other comparable players in their positions and their level. Same thing with Boston, with Patrice Bergeron and Marchand and their top players in Boston. And that's kind of how you have to do it. Like,
I also feel that's a locker room mentality. Like there's guys like you've seen it with Sid as well. Like Sid took a pay cut,
right?
Because he wanted Malkin to stay there. He wanted Letang to stay there. Fleury at the time to stay there. Like I feel like as much as guys, Marner, Tavares, I want to stay at home, want to be near the family, whatever. I don't think anybody's taking hometown discounts to go play for the Leafs. Maybe later in your career, like a Gio, Spezza, Wayne Simmons.
If someone's saying we're going to give you $8 million and you're demanding 10, how can you not live on 8? Now you think about it, like if you thought long term, right? I'm going to make $8 million. Like I know right now, star players in Toronto and the GTA, they've got deals with car dealerships and watches and that because they make other money in the stuff. Mm-hmm. And if I take 8, and I know I'm going to make up a lot of extra money through endorsements on the side, and we have some extra cap space, then maybe, just maybe, we have 1 or 2 extra players that put us over the top and get us out of the first round. And that mentality of a player, I know it's been talked about with Nathan McKinnon in Colorado, and it's a reality. I mean, you see it all the time in the NFL. So-and-so quarterback restructured his contract to give the team more cap space to get this other player.
Yeah.
It has to be done.
It has to be done, but I don't think John Tavares did that.
Well, part of the problem is you can ask for the money. The team doesn't have to give you the money. Mm-hmm. Right? When they didn't have to give Nylander as much money as they did. They could have played hardball with Marner and give him, say, this is what we're going to pay you. But I felt personally the Leafs caved a bit and made sure that they all got paid. So they all got paid and all got their money and to the max of their abilities. And now they find themselves in the situation they are with a couple of injured defensemen and relying on defensemen in their late 30s to hold them over until these other guys get healthy. Mm-hmm. And that's it in a nutshell. When Tampa throws out Victor Hedman for 25 minutes a night and the Vegas Golden Knights got Pietrangelo and I mean, look what Eric Carlson's doing in San Jose. I mean, no matter how bad the Leafs would want him, they can't trade for him because they could never afford him because they don't have the cap space.
Mm-hmm.
But some other team around the league could make a deal with San Jose because they have the cap space and they're already really good. And if they get Eric Carlson, look out.
Well, I love that you just brought up Eric Carlson because that is a perfect segue to our next kind of topic. Whenever we look at Canadian markets in the trading, and again, it's all the beat writers or the fan pages that you see on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, whatever, and they're talking about Eric Carlson being traded. I think there was another one yesterday. I seen Nikita Zaitsev, refusing a trade to another Canadian market, and Eric Carlson was rumored to have. There was a deal in place with San Jose and a Canadian team, and he nixed that one. You brought up earlier the kind of the tax-free in Tampa, and I know a lot of the states have lower taxes than, let's say, the province of Ontario or Quebec. Mm-hmm. I just feel like there needs to be some kind of middle ground to make it that all 32 teams have that same appeal. And I have a fix in my head, which I'll tell you, but I want to hear what you think.
Now, I see Eric Carlson's married with a kid. So he's not just a hockey player, he's a family man. And there's a family aspect to it. So you have to ask yourself as a player, especially with a family, where will my family be happiest? And I don't think it has anything to do with, it gets to a point where I know sometimes we're like, oh, well, he doesn't want to pay taxes in Quebec and play for the Canadians. Maybe he wants to play for the Canadians, but maybe his wife and family are really happy in San Jose. And that's part of it. I mean, I live about 30 minutes north of Toronto, and we've been here almost 20 years. I don't want to go. We're happy here, and Detroit is not the nicest city in North America, but there are people that like living there, even though they're part of the Red Wings, and maybe they don't want to go. And I think that's the other thing we have to consider, that it's not just a Canadian-American thing. It's, there are people that say play for the Calgary Flames or Vancouver Canucks who absolutely love it, and they don't want to go because their family's happy, the kids are in a good school, the good quality of life. I don't want to go anywhere else. I like it here. I think it goes both ways. And it's an easy story for a lot of writers to say, Joel, is, well, I mean, Eric Carlson doesn't want to go to Canada because of the taxes and stuff like that. I know for a fact that California has got steep taxes. California taxes are some of the, I think New York State's number one, California's number two. And so if you're staying in California, it's not because it's tax-free, it's anything but. Vegas is tax-free. Texas is really low tax. Florida's tax-free. California is not. They pay a lot of tax there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's part of where is your family happiest? And that's one of the things with so many teams in the NHL. If you get to a city and your kid's in a school and your wife's got a nice house and a group of friends and you have a good quality of life and you're happy, and that's part of the reason you're saying no, not because you don't want to play in Toronto or Montreal or whatever, but maybe you just don't want to leave where you're at because you're happy there.
That's very true. I mean, I've never seen anybody sad at a beach. So, I mean, that's...
I've talked to players before, and they say, you realize that when you're in a warmer climate and you're driving to the rink with your window down, and you get out of the rink and it's 10, 15, 20 degrees Celsius, this doesn't suck. I don't have to shovel when I get home, and it's actually nice weather. I don't know if you've ever been to North Carolina, Raleigh, where the Hurricanes play. That's a nice climate there. The winter's really short.
I love it. We actually have a place down in Florida.
It's beautiful.
And we drive down, and again, I've never been to some of the cities that have NHL teams. I've never been to Pittsburgh. But I know it's nice whenever you can walk around without a coat on when you start hitting North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, even Virginia at times.
Raleigh's a nice sized city. It's a short flight. If you have relatives, it's a short flight back to Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, go back home. If you have family there, you're in the Eastern time zone. If you like golf, you're in North Carolina, right? The ocean's not that far away. It's not overly big. You don't have to worry. It doesn't have sort of the same sort of crime issues that maybe like a Washington D.C. or Chicago would have.
Mhm.
And the climate is nice. So if you're on a 10, think about this. Sometimes these players go 9, 10 game road trips. It happens, right? 8 game road trip. So they're gone 10, 12 days. When your wife and kids are stuck at home and you don't have to worry about snow and ice and shoveling, it takes a lot of stress off you. It does. Like it's a fact of life, right? If you know that your wife's basically a single mom for the next 2 weeks while you're on a road trip, and they don't have to worry about the weather, just getting the kids to school and doing the thing, but they don't have to worry about ice storms and being snowed in and everything that goes with it. That has, that plays a factor.
That's very true. I think that's maybe something that I always overlook, because to me it's always, your career is never that long, and I guess I always look at it from the value of the almighty dollar. In my head, the fix to make the appeal, and again, not taking into consideration wife, kids, where you're living, is you take the highest, whether it's California, whether it's Ontario, whether it's Quebec, you take the highest taxed area in the NHL, and whatever the percentage is of money that those players on that team loses. Let's say it's 3%. Every other NHL team, depending on where you are, so Florida, players that are in Florida, players that are in Nevada, in Dallas, whatever, they're each putting in that different percentage. They're putting in that 3% to the PA.
Good luck selling that to the agents, because now you're taking money out of the agent's pocket.
But I'm not done, though. You take that 3% out, you put that into the PA. The PA then, at the end of the season, distributes all those funds that makes up. So if you're in Pennsylvania and you're getting taxed X amount, you only have to put in 1.5 if you're a player. Then that gets distributed throughout, all whatever 800 and something players in the league. So that way everybody is making the same, and you're all losing the same. That way, all 32 cities have the same appeal.
On paper, it makes sense. I just think that would be a really, really tough sell. I think that would be a tough sell for some of the players. Wouldn't agree to it. Some agents, that's something that would have to be collectively bargained. And unfortunately, every time the CBA comes up, there's so many other things they have to negotiate. I don't think they could negotiate that.
Do you think Sorry, go ahead.
Unless all 6 Canadian teams went in there as a united front and saying, hey, I think we need to do something, and some of these other teams and states that are highly taxed to make it even. But then you're dealing with owners, and now some of these owners from these other states and other cities were like, I don't want to do that. And so then Gary Bettman wouldn't just be dealing with the PA. He'd have to deal with all the owners, because owners in these other cities may not agree to that.
So do you think another flip side, and this is just stuff that I've thought of to try and make it even across the board, where let's say teams that are more that are in states or provinces that are higher taxed, so again, Quebec, Ontario, California come to mind, their cap is up by whatever percentage that their players are losing out on. So let's say, and it wouldn't necessarily be you can sign an extra player, but when it comes to negotiating contracts, X amount of this player's contract isn't, you get what I'm trying to say? Like, it doesn't count against the cap. They can spend a little more to offset the fact that these players are losing.
Okay, I think a solution has been talked about from a few people and a number of agents, is the idea of trading cap space. I don't know if you guys have heard of that.
I do it in fantasy hockey, but
right. So you do it in fantasy hockey, and they're saying, why can't they do it in real hockey, where you can trade cap space? So if you could trade cap space, teams that are in cap hell, and you could trade cap space, well, then all of a sudden you wouldn't have to get rid of 2 or 3 key players like you do now. So there are some solutions possibly out there. I just don't know that teams in say the St. Louis Blues and Dallas Stars, and the Florida teams and the Vegas Golden Knights, and you start looking at some of the teams that with low to no taxes, the owners are going to be okay with the Montreal Canadiens getting a little bit more money to negotiate with in the offseason because of the tax situation. They go, well, that's not fair. If I lose Joel, if Joel goes to Montreal because they had more room, that's an unfair advantage. So that's part of the problem.
Though, if it all comes down into the wash, like
Right.
what I would be making more in Montreal, I'd be making the exact same in Tampa just because of the tax situation.
Right, but I just think this someone way smarter than I am, who has better handle on the CBA and the numbers, has to come up with a solution, and it has to be collectively bargained, and everyone has to agree to it, and players, the PA, and the owners in the league. And until that happens, it's going to be a reality for a lot of teams that lose players. I mean, it happened all the time with certain players that go, well, I could sign as a free agent here, and it's all not necessarily a Canadian team, but if I stay with my team here and I'm not paying any tax, man, so what? They're only going to give me $7.5 million a year. Without tax, that's like $9 million somewhere else. I'm good. I'll stay here.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to figure out a way to even the playing field where these stories, like you said, that it might be easy stories to write about, are done with. Where there is no, oh, well, the money's playing an advantage. Where it comes down strictly, do you want to play here? It's not about money. It's not about whatever, because that's not an issue.
If Winnipeg was playing like the 96 Red Wings and winning at like a 700% clip and look like they're going all the way, players would go, trade me to Winnipeg, because they ultimately want to win a Stanley Cup.
Mm-hmm.
If your team is like lights out great and looks like they're going to run the table, come deadline, you'd be telling your agent, hey, I don't care where it is. I'll go to Tuktoyaktuk if I have to. I just want to win a Stanley Cup. I don't care if it's Baffin Island. So I know we put a lot into it. Like, so if you're in a Southern team that's horrible and you could play for the Buffalo Sabres, and people make Buffalo jokes all they want, and Buffalo's all of a sudden a great team and looks like they're going to go on a run, you'll gladly play in Buffalo. You don't care. I mean, that happens in all sports. All of a sudden, no matter where the franchise is, if they're winning, years ago, people used to make fun of Green Bay. Like Green Bay was going to Siberia, and then Vince Lombardi came along and turned Green Bay into Titletown, USA, and the Packers were the team to play for. And then they were bad again, and then Mike Holmgren came back to Green Bay and made them good again, and then signed Reggie White, and then they didn't lose to go along with Brett Favre. So a lot of that is of those teams, a lot of those Canadian markets, that, hey, we didn't get this player. If they can build their team to such a point that they're so good, players, no matter where they're at in the NHL, what city they're in, will say, we're going there because I know we're going to win and we're going to have a deep playoff run, and I want to be part of a winner. Because ultimately, winning trumps everything. Because to win a Stanley Cup, get your name in that trophy, have a day with that trophy, that's more important than all of it.
Well, I think that's all we have for time for today, Jim. I want to thank you. This has been phenomenal. I think the insight that you've provided, and like I said, your pedigree of, you said it best earlier, kind of touching so many different facets of covering hockey. I mean, I really appreciate, and I feel like this is you're definitely somebody to look up to in what we're doing.
Well, thank you guys. It's a great podcast, what you guys are doing. I just keep up the great work, and I appreciate you having me on. Cornwall, double thumbs up.
And now we move on to our final segment, Blunder of the Week. And this week is a doozy. Joel, I think we decided it was the New Jersey Devils, not the team, the fans. I'll let you go.
13 in a row. Congratulations. I don't think Lindy Ruff has had a run like that since, I think like the 2007 Sabres when they made it the conference final against Ottawa. But not here to talk about the team, like Justin said, the fans. So last night they played against the Toronto Maple Leafs at the Prudential Center. And 2-0 for the Leafs. And they get some video reviews. 3 of them for disallowed goals. Justin and I were reviewing those goals today, actually, and we agree 2 of them should have been disallowed. The Nick Bastian goal. I think I would have allowed that one. I didn't really see any goaltender interference with Matt Murray. Regardless of whether they should have been allowed or disallowed, the throwing of objects on the ice, to me, it's crazy. It's dumb. Your team won 13 in a row. Yeah, you can be mad with the referees, whatever. But, if you're throwing a $12 beer on the ice, you're not hurting anybody but yourself.
Potentially.
I guess potentially, yes. I mean, you could hit a referee off ice, skating guy that cleans up the snow, or I guess another fan. But I'm just saying, at the end of the day, it's kind of useless. It's dumb. The referee's not like, oh shit, this guy threw a beer. I better, that's good goal. Yeah, sorry. So to me, I don't know. It's dumb. It's useless. It's childish. Delays the game. I think the Leafs actually went back to the dressing room. I don't know, good way to get kicked out, not be allowed back for future games. I don't know, just all around it just makes you look shitty. I mean, if it was earlier this season, the Canucks fans threw jerseys on the ice. That's dumb as well. $150 down the drain, or $70 if you went with one of the knockoff jerseys. Or the Leafs fans a few years back when they did that same thing, throwing jerseys on the ice. I don't know. Just, to me, it's dumb. A waste of time. Just unnecessary, especially after your team just put up 13 wins in a row. Whatever, they lost one. They'll keep it up. Hopefully make the playoffs. I just think it's just dumb. Classless. Waste of time. Waste of money. Good for you. I mean, I don't know about you, Justin, but the inflation rates and how expensive everything has definitely tightened my pocketbook.
I definitely hold on tight to my beers.
Yeah, if you have the money to throw away a $12 beer, good for you. Congratulations, you've made it. So on that, we'll leave that right there, and we will wrap up this episode of Average Jocks Hockey Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
All right. That's it. We're done.